Forbes Books presents The Great Digital Transformation with Gerard highlighting the pioneers that reimagined possibilities and reimagined businesses. Today, Gerry and I are joined by Christina Bieniek, the Deputy CEO at Deloitte Consulting, who's been recognized as one of Consulting Magazine's top 25 consultants. Christina is a renowned strategist who sets the agenda for disruptive change through her collaborative approach and focus on integration, simplification, and speed. We're going to get into real-world examples of how companies are leveraging AI to deliver hyper-personalized experiences, streamline operations, and gain valuable insights into customer behavior and preferences. Christina, welcome to the podcast.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, Christina, we don't want to make people wait because we know we are 1 year post ChatGPT. Everyone has to talk about AI. So we don't want to waste any time. I don't waste your time, Gerry's time. 1 year plus in, what has been the transformative reach of AI in the world of business?
Listen, I think we're 1 year in and we're probably all having a flashback to how was it possible that we were not even where we are today a year ago. So I would say it is pervasive in every conversation that we're having with our clients, every conversation that we're having around transformation. You can't have a transformative conversation without Gen AI. And everything is, it started with, how should I think about this? What does it mean? Is this real? And now I think we're seeing more people saying, okay, now what do I actually do? And how do I think about use cases? How do I start on that journey? What does it actually mean to my organization? How do I put the consumer? How do I put my associate? How do we put our teams at the center of that?
Yeah, there are 10,000 things you can use AI for, and you need to pick 4 or 5 that can make sense and can transform your business. In our pipeline, in the past 6 months, I think all of it has some AI in it in a way or another, which is impressive. Like it went from 0 to 100% in 6 months, and it's here to stay. I mean, this is going to transform our industry, is going to transform also the way we work, because our industry, my company and your company, are going to have to change the way we work completely, bottoms up, everything. And it's very transformative. I think it's challenging. It's challenging because change is painful. Even for the most visionary people and the most tech-savvy people, change is so painful.
Gerry, I think that point of, we're going to have to change ourselves as well is one that, I know we're spending, and I imagine you are as well, a lot of time on what does that actually mean? And the idea of 6 months ago, people were still trying to think about the use cases, as you said, but now we're seeing more how and how do I prioritize those use cases? How do I think about what's most important to my business? And then how do I experiment, test, and then figure out how do I implement and scale? And so I think we're going to continue to see the pace of change over the next 6 months. We'll be having even different conversations than we are today.
And speaking of which, one of the part of the conversation points that drives me crazy, Christina, and I'd love to get your take on it, and Gerry, is that there's, how there's always a group think of like how we approach things. The group think now about AI is just a tool. And it always annoys me when they use that word because it minimizes what the impact is. A tool is like a wrench or a screwdriver. But what do you think about the people that are using, that to me now, a cliched statement of AI is just a tool, man?
I think you hit it spot on. It's more than just a tool. When we think about, the use cases and what we're seeing and how we're bringing AI into even today, just things that we're doing. I think about, we put out this AI dossier last fall. And then when you think about Gen AI, and we have to talk about AI and Gen AI kind of together when we think about that, this isn't just a tool. This is going to fundamentally shift how we work. This is going to, when we think about the data that's needed, when we think about security and trustworthy AI, every aspect of what we know today will be touched and changed. And it's not just a tool that's doing that.
Think of the way customer experience have been changed by having internet access and by having a mobile in your pocket. That has completely changed customer experience and the way you interact and everything. This is going to be bigger than that, way bigger than that, because it affects the society everywhere. We are not even able to imagine all the impact and the changes that this is going to bring, because we have to rethink a society, even the way we tax. Do you tax AI? How do you work in an AI-enabled world? People are thinking that maybe we should tax AI. So I think it's definitely not a tool. It's a huge change. It's a huge transformation, and this is not just a transformation for the business. It's a societal transformation.
Well, we're already seeing it, Gerry. If you think about some of the things, when we think about how organizations are leveraging chatbots, just take a simple example of an AI-powered chatbot and what it's able to do today around a personalized customer service, whether it's answering queues instantly, recommending products, providing personalized content. That experience of today is something that many of us are already starting to see, or those are where use cases are being developed. So I think the pervasive nature of Gen AI, we're just at the forefront of really imagining what that can look like.
And also, I want to mention the fact that, Gerry is obsessed with customer experience, and that phrase has come up a couple times here. How is customer experience going to be affected by all this, Christina? Because at the end of the day, that's Gerry's bag. He's built an entire business on improving customer experience for his clients. So how do you think that plays a part?
Look, in some ways, it still needs to start where it always has, with putting people at the center, both in how we solve the problem, how we frame the problem, and what it allows when we're thinking about that transformation. So taking that holistic view with kind of the customer at the center, that customer first view, I think that's where it has to start. And great personalization is about meeting customers in that right moment, with the right context, with the right experiences to build the human, the empathetic, those one-to-one connections. And getting there is going to require us, as we all know, to have the data, the automation capabilities, kind of teams collaborating and really curating that ecosystem of partners. And we're seeing that. And I think it's even more amplified when we think about Gen AI. And, I talked about chatbots, but you could talk about whether it's how we use data analytics, how we invest in CRM, and what CRM truly can mean when we think about individual customer interactions across channels. When we think about customer privacy, how are we maintaining and personalizing experiences while respecting privacy? So I think the customer is actually probably even more at the center of the decisions and the choices that we make.
Yes, and I think there is, since a few years now, we are talking about hyper-personalization and, have this idea of having the customer at the center, but it was never quite there yet, because you had so many systems talking together, so many data points, and it was always kind of difficult to bring it all together in a meaningful way, and finding those patterns in the data, finding that relevant information in the mountains of data that you had. Now with AI, this is going to actually happen, this hyper-personalization. You will be able to really personalize an entire interaction with a customer, with a user, with an employee, just by connecting all of these things together in a much more meaningful way. So yeah, I think you're spot on. It starts with the customer in the center, and bringing all of these things to the table will just elevate the conversation so much more.
And Gerry, I'm curious, when I think about Joe's question, there are so many things that we've talked about personalizing for years that are now going to become real when we think about, item assortment planning. Think about a retailer and the ability to, we can now have AI help to determine which should be stocked or substituted to optimize sales, margins, inventory, customer satisfaction, kind of the consumer demand planning. There's so many things that there's going to be an unlock to use AI to augment marketing, help with forecasting, using AI to help with digital contact centers. So there's just such a range of things that are now real when we think about that personalization, to your point.
Yeah, I think there are so many companies that will have a hard time with this, because their systems are still not properly connected. If you're not connected, you might have the best AI in the world. There is no data. So I think and what I'm still surprised, even in today's world, from time to time I bump into a situation where I see people operating businesses like 30 years ago. It's really, this goes to what I said about changing and how difficult change is. It sometimes you have businesses that go through bankruptcy and they still don't change.
Your point on adoption is so interesting because the maturity level of organizations, I think part of why we see a kind of a range of adoption where people are goes to that point. And data is oftentimes the hardest piece, like going from the concept to getting it to scale. If we have those legacy systems, legacy data and analytics platforms, if things are decentralized in the operation or decentralized in authority and responsibility and decision-making, that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we see. And then the organization can get stifled in some ways because if I can't address those things, I'm not going to be able to move forward if I have that inconsistent, poor quality, poor data. So I think that's a big thing that many teams are trying to say, what do I need to do from a technology perspective in order to take advantage of, AI, Gen AI, to better my business?
And we got to do this now, Christina, right? Because I worry about the fact that if we're screwing up the data we're putting in now, feeding these LLMs, the model 10 years from now is going to be all screwed up because of the data we put in 2024. Do you find that as being somewhat important as well in terms of like making sure we get this data part of it right now?
Yeah, I think the data part is absolutely a must do to get addressed now and to really be thinking about like the concept of having a data strategy and understanding the needs of what data is most important to our organization and how I'm going to take and use other data sources. It's probably at the height that it's been. The other thing I would say though, Joe, equal to that, if organizations don't know their why and their goals, so understanding, why am I doing this? What is the use case? What's the goal that I'm either trying to improve the customer experience, the employee experience? Is it to be more nimble or agile? Understanding that as well before just embarking on a technology implementation. Otherwise, you're doing tech for tech's sake and not really changing an organization. So I'd put that right up there with you have to have the data right. It's foundational, but you also have to know what are we solving for and what's the goal.
Yeah, I think it's it starts with what's my business. Like I've been asked before that you have a shoe retailer that has implemented a lot of technology, and now they are calling themselves like a tech-enabled business, right? And that's not the case. They are still doing the same things. They are selling shoes, and if they do not pay attention to their main business about selling shoes and about really meeting customer needs and customer satisfaction, it doesn't matter how nice of a technology you have. It doesn't matter how many gadgets you have. At the end of the day, if you haven't thought things through from a customer's point of view and found that ROI into everything that you are doing, like why am I doing this? What is my end goal? Where am I going with this AI or data or whatever I'm doing with technology? Now, otherwise, you're going to end up, as you said, playing with gadgets and playing with technology for the sake of technology, not really for the sake of business.
And look, it's pretty easy today. I mean, I see organizations who they sometimes have different teams that are playing with different technologies, and it can do two things. Like, A, you don't want to stifle innovation, but you also want to make sure that we're not actually investing in things or innovating things that aren't going to drive towards the end objectives or the goals. And so how you manage that balance, I think, is pretty interesting, especially when, look, we've got to raise the tech savviness in most organizations at the same time. And that's, something else that I think being tech fluent isn't really a differentiator anymore, but it's got to be a core competency of a leadership team to make sure they actually do understand some of what others in the past might have considered more advanced. That's just kind of baseline today.
Yeah, there are, what I'm curious to hear your opinion on, you have these early adopters and the companies who are always doing well because, well, they are always in the forefront and they will be doing quite great with AI and everything. But what do you do with the middle of the pack that are struggling even with the old stuff? What do you think what would be the best way to bring them into this new revolution? How do we go about that?
I think some of it goes to, there's got to just be broad education and understanding that's developed. So you think about all the stakeholders, everything from whether it's a board and, what does your board understand in the role that they play in governing? You think about your executive teams, you think about how you're engaging with customers, whoever your customer is, but how you're bringing teams on the journey. And one of the things that we found is, you have to make sure that everyone, that idea of like tech savviness beyond just the CIO or the CTO becomes even more important as we think about Gen AI being pervasive in a business, because it's not just going to change technology. It's actually going to change the people, the processes, and how the work gets done. So, in some of those leading organizations, you're right, Gerry, they're always out in front. And oftentimes they're out in front on these topics because they have a tone from the top with their CEO, their C-suite, and then they've got kind of the groundswell coming up. We're finding that you have to get to a critical mass of clarity around purpose and the why. And that's what we've been spending time with clients who are still maybe looking at it, wondering, what should I do? How do you start with understanding the why for them, which to your point goes back to what's the business we're in?
It's interesting what you're saying is that the change probably has to start not even at C-level, but really at board level.
Especially if we're making big investment asks, or material investment asks. What is the board's understanding of the journey that we're going to be on and what the transformation needs to look like? So aligning all of those stakeholders, I think, becomes really important.
Let's get a little bit into transformation, Christina, because in 2020, most tech companies thought that no one would ever leave their house again and everything would be tech-based and everyone could work wherever they want. And then all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, we don't want to do that because we spent $1 billion on a campus, so we want everyone back in there. But then all of a sudden, this correction happens in 2022 where they lay off all these people they overhired. And now we're in the middle of an AI race to victory. So how do companies balance all this of like, oh shit, we screwed up, we hired too much, we got to scale back, but oh no, wait a minute, now there's this AI thing, and now we got to transform in that way. Tell me about this sort of internal struggle of these companies trying to keep up with the times, but also worrying about the bottom line.
It's interesting. We just did a survey with Forbes Insights, and there were 500 leaders surveyed, and it was interesting. The question was around tech implementation differentiators and how they're managing their biggest challenges. And I share that because some of the observations on that list of kind of key challenges got into like previous project outcomes and experiences, like poor perception, poor implementation tactics, discomfort with change, lack of performance management, change fatigue. And then the other was around like resourcing, like limited resources or time to develop training. I think all of that goes a little bit to this question that you just posed of what should I be thinking about now versus, we were in a place in 2020. We all lived through our kind of COVID era, the bubble that we were in, that we've worked differently. And now we're coming out of that saying, okay, how do we actually work to drive towards those change? And I think we have to recognize, like, what's the past mindset? What is either kind of the hangover that came from those prior implementations, good or bad? What was the discomfort level with change or change fatigue that my organization may or may not be having? And how do I layer all that into kind of the ways of working to drive change today? And you're right, it does get into like, when are we in the office? When are we not in the office? How are we actually going to work together as a team towards a common goal? And, the in-office, out-of-office question, I will tell you, because I know many still wonder what is the right balance on this. I think we're still solving it. I think we are still balancing what is the right way to work. And I know a lot of times when we work with clients, we talk about like, what are the moments that matter for us to be together? And what does that mean for your culture, your mission, the business that you're in? And you see different needs based on that, whether you're talking about a manufacturing client or a retail, someone in the retail industry or financial services. So we see a spectrum, but I don't think we can declare done to what ways of working looks like in this, new hybrid world that we live in.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the beauty of this is that now that we've seen the technology working, now that we've seen that it can be done remote, now we have the flexibility to do it any way we want it, to mix it up in many ways. And it really has to adjust to your organizational culture and to your customers to see, okay, what's the best way to interact with them? How often do we need to be face-to-face? And really use results as an indicator to, does it work? Does it make sense? If it makes sense, then okay, it's fine. If not, then let's adjust the mix. Let's adjust the mix until we get it right. And for some organizations, there might be a much heavier on-site percentage, and for some, it's a much heavier remote percentage. But I don't think we can ever go back to 100% on-site anymore. I mean, that time is gone. Unless you're Tesla and Elon Musk is asking you to come back.
Gerry, I also think the thing that we've broken in this new way of working is that it's consistent everywhere. So the idea that every organization is because let's face it, for a while, we worked in a world where it was pretty consistent. And I think that even our profession, we had a whole rhythm and rigor of how we traveled and when clients expected us. I think this time, to your point, has proven that not all things are going to be the same. And that could mean across different organizations and within organizations. And so I think we're still testing what the end state will be, or we may live in a place where as Gen AI evolves and how the work gets done evolves, this will continue to evolve.
And in the culture piece of this, Christina, my argument to fully remote offices is if you go into an office where there are people working and they're there all the time, 9 to 5, 5 days a week, it's a culture of the back of their heads. Because we're so connected to our technology, all of their work happens on a screen. So they really don't have a chance to have those, like the bus. I love to have people run into each other in the halls and talk and hash out ideas. But since all the work is being done on the screen, there's no such thing as a whiteboard anymore because now it's a digital whiteboard. So you're looking at a screen anyway. How do you solve to that? The fact that even if you want people in the office, they're still not going to create that magic culture that you're hoping to that gets created on its own.
Okay, so Joe, I have a lot of passion around that because I think the worst thing we can do is have no clarity of why and when someone's in an office, and then everyone comes in and they're Zooming, they're on Teams, they're using Google, they're using whatever we're using to communicate and just staring at a computer because then there isn't that human interaction. So the places where I've seen people and, organizations do this well is when you create the moments that matter. So it's like we may have one day a week, or I've seen some organizations say it's 2 days a week, or maybe we have one day a month where it's like we're putting all of our team meetings together. And so we're curating, in some ways, Gerry, it's like we're curating experiences for our own people that say it's worthwhile to come in the office to do X, Y, and Z. And we're going to gear everything. And look, I've seen some people say they want it 3 days a week. We've seen some 2 days a week. You've seen one. I've seen others who call it every third Thursday. So this is where we're still experimenting. And even in organizations, you see IT maybe doing one thing, finance another, the more customer front of house facing doing others. But I think it's very much like being deliberate in creating those moments. Otherwise, you're right, Joe. You walk in and it's like everyone's staring at computers. And the worst that's really hard is when you have a team of 10, let's say it, 5 are in the office, 5 are at their houses. And then the question is, well, should we sit in the room together? And is the technology in the room going to make it work? Or are we all going to sit at our desks and then Zoom in or Teams or Google or whatever it is, whatever the technology with that?
You need to be really intentional about the governance of the meetings, the governance of how people interact. Like the way you said it is like, you really need to make sure that if you say, okay, Monday, we all come to the office. Okay, what do we do Monday? Because if Monday is going to be the same as like any other day, then why come to the office? It has to be an interaction day. It has to be a place where there is some collaboration that couldn't be done remote, or the on-site presence adds something to it. It's true, you started, Joe, at the beginning with that thing like the office that bumps into people and whatever. Being at the office gives you the opportunity to interact with your colleagues without necessarily having to schedule it. You just go, hey, do you have 10 minutes? Let's talk. And that in itself generates ideas and creativity and generates results. But because nowadays nobody's in the office anymore and we are all over the place, and you might have 5 people in the office and one that is remote, and then everybody has to be remote anyways, well, then you really have to be intentional about the collaboration. You really have to design it. It cannot be just happening because it happens. I think I very much agree with what Christina said, that there needs to be more planning and thinking about, okay, why do we meet in the office?
I call it planned serendipity, because there's no serendipitous moments really anymore in our working ways. So you have to plan, how am I going to actually, do that? And especially when you bring a new team together, I mean, that is one of those moments where you have to ask yourself, like, I may need everybody in the office, because building those connections so then people can actually, or you have to make time on these calls where we're all sitting in our home offices to build those connections.
Especially at the beginning of a project, or when you bring a new team on board or whatever, when people get to know each other, especially if they've never worked together, that really makes a lot of a difference in general for collaboration.
Yeah. And last subject, last part of this culture piece, Christina, I feel that the pandemic has made people believe they could bend space and time with their meetings. I know people that have 8 meetings a day, and I think to myself, like, so that means you're going from one meeting to another, but all you're doing is speeding up at the end of the last meeting to try to finish everything you just did so you could just jump into the next thing, and then nothing gets accomplished. It's like these meeting marathons that people get into. And I know intentionality has been a big part of this conversation, but that's intentional, but that's intentional in the wrong way, because, okay, I'm going to stack up this calendar, go back to back, and then at the end of each meeting, you're like, what just happened? Because I went from one meeting to the other. Our brains aren't meant to go that fast. Our brains are not meant to consume information like we're flipping through channels when we used to do that back in the day.
Yeah. And Joe, sometimes we're not leaving for lunch. I mean, we are just stacked and you're running. And then what happens is once you run late for one, you're dead in the water. Like you can't catch up. You're rolling into every meeting late. I mean, listen, I've caught myself even needing to take a step back and just look to say, is there blocked thinking time? So like it goes to like planning serendipitous moments. Like you have to plan almost like, when am I actually going to think and have a moment of downtime? Because by the way, we used to have more downtime when we were on planes all the time, or people had more downtime when they were commuting, or they had downtime just in some rhythms that could allow you to think. So finding those moments, I think, is really key. I know lots of people try to start the meeting at 5 past the hour. I got to tell you, I feel like what happens is the last meeting ran over, so there's still no break.
And now you have internet on the plane, so forget about the downtime.
Well, thankfully, they have not enabled some of the video calling capabilities on the plane yet. So we have internet, but we can't actually join conference calls or video calls.
So how can we use technology to empower culture? Let's start within. So right now, how would you, when you're consulting a company, and empowering the people that are part of these teams, regardless of what department they're in, how can technology play a part in empowering them?
I think technology can play a ton of roles. What we've found is starting with, if you think about when you're really trying to drive change and you want to like change and transform an organization, clear and frequent communication is probably the most important thing. So using technology and using various communication channels. So yes, we can keep sending, emails, but how do we do things more, whatever your form of tech is? There's a lot of things that allow for better kind of ad hoc ways of communicating and piling on with each other and tagging people. So how are you shifting the channels? And how are you encouraging through some of those channels more two-directional dialogue so that it's not just leaders speaking at and sending, emails, but actually engaging open dialogue? And then how do you provide context? And so I think there are a lot of technologies that can underpin the way we're communicating and communicating in a way that is clear, frequent, has a greater kind of bi-directional dialogue. And underneath all of that is how do you bring a human voice? And so that empathy that sometimes change can create anxiety and people can get nervous. But it also, the thing we're finding technology is enabling us to do is to share more stories. We're better storytellers today. And the ability for people to pull and consume data as well as them pushing, I think really helps with, if we're talking about kind of that employee associate engagement and how you're really bringing your teams and the organization with you on whatever the transformation is.
Yeah, I think it's, there is something to be said about treating the employees as we are thinking about our customers, hyper-personalization, good content, good conversation, two-way conversation. I think I've seen many companies that kind of neglect the way the information flows within the company and the way, even in the meetings, like the fact that we do the meeting on-site or off-site or remote or whatnot is how we do the meetings. But what's important is what we do in a meeting. Like, how effective is the meeting? Like, what is the outcome of the meeting? And do we need to talk for hours, or 20 minutes are enough to get to some kind of a conclusion? So that the what part is often neglected, and you end up with this inflation of meetings that's kind of like a roller coaster that never ends, and you don't get to the end goal where you need to deliver the results that you're expecting for.
You said something that struck me. I was with a CEO and their leadership team last week. They've embarked publicly on this large transformation, multi-year journey. And one of the things that they're wrestling with is like, how do we bring everyone, and they've got a lot of people in the field, hundreds of thousands, like, how do we take people on a journey? And she asked this question, how do I make sure I'm getting feedback and input from the right people? And so your point of like, how do you orchestrate the meetings? How do you use technology to help to do that? And, we shared this example within Deloitte that we sometimes talk about, how do you debate issues and how do you allow people to engage in that debate, especially if there's two sides of a spectrum and you're trying to drive a change? How do you make sure you gather that, but then quickly make the decision, like quickly make the choice, and don't get stuck in a perpetual loop of collaboration and consensus building, but get enough of that? And so we talked a bit to your point of like, we have to be more thoughtful in how we structure meetings. We have to be more thoughtful in the use of technology in meetings than we needed to before, when everyone sat in a room together. Sometimes it was a little easier, and now we need to use different tools, different techniques, and the intentionality. But I was reflecting on this conversation last week, and it's very much at the core of some of what we're talking about. And, we were encouraging her to say, how do you debate issues in a way that you're bringing others in on that change journey to get to an end result?
That's great. And Christina, I want to go back to your storytelling part. And I feel like that is an undervalued thing with most companies, because as you know, a lot of companies will do quarterly and annual meetings where every senior leader will do a presentation, and it's usually really boring slides with all these numbers. No one's going to remember any of that shit. That is just, especially if it's not your department, it's going to go in one ear, out the other. If you tell a story that can connect what your department's doing to what has been done, that's to me is more effective than showing folks that you know how to use PowerPoint. Like, to me, I feel like it just misses the point of having these annual and quarterly kind of meetings with folks if all you're going to do is just like analysis by paralysis, just shoving numbers in their faces.
Okay, so Joe, I'm like an anti-PowerPoint person in the moment. And I know that sounds odd because I'm in a consulting environment, but like, how do we lose the PowerPoint? But it does require people to be able to story tell differently. So if there's three things I really need you to know, Is it 3 numbers? And then I tell a story around them. And how do I bring in other voices so you don't have to just listen to, and like neuroscience would say, like changing of voices, changing of format, weaving different messages. Like it helps to get messages to stick. So the intentionality of all of those things, I think, becomes even more important. And a lot of times, like if people don't understand the why at its core, you lost them. So sometimes we go into way too much detail rather than just pulling it up and explaining like, why change? Like what is, what's the business imperative, the objective, and like what may be flawed in our thinking of today? And then how do I change that? How do I take people on that why to really understand my why? It's a thing that I think we've lost the skill at in some cases because we become so PowerPoint dependent and so dependent upon a level of detail that you can lose, like you're lost. You don't know what the plot is anymore sometimes. So yes, you know what? One last thing, we've started writing memos sometimes to each other where it's like, okay, somebody just put a couple words down on a page, tag us all into the document, and then let's have a conversation so we can just get to like the clarity of thought instead of crazy extensive PowerPoint papers. And look, PowerPoint has a place. We need PowerPoint, but like how do we get back to storytelling so that people can understand a why?
I love PowerPoint. I love PowerPoint. But here is the thing. It's not the technology that's a problem. It's the way it's being used. That's the problem. Like I hate presentations where people read from the PowerPoint. What's the point? What's the point? Like that's not the point of PowerPoint. PowerPoint is there to give you support, to give you some visual cues, to project to help your story building, to kind of give you a more support for your story building. But if you don't have a story, it doesn't matter how good your PowerPoint is. There is no story.
So, Gerry, that's the key, though. I think sometimes, depending upon the individual, we go to building the deck and we start obsessing about all the frameworks and the visuals and the tables. And it's like, can we just take a step back? And what is the story that we're trying to tell? What are the key points of the story that need to land? And then what do we need to visualize that? And look, I think for organizations, sometimes we spend more time creating something for like a small group of leaders to get aligned. I get it. There's a time and a place where you do need an amazing visual and you do need those things. But sometimes we do it in every meeting when we don't need it everywhere.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. All right, Christina, we'll wrap this up by plugging your services at Deloitte. Who needs a consulting company like Deloitte? Who would is it a company that's going under? Is a startup? Like who could use your services?
Everybody.
Well, Gerry just answered for me.
No.
No, I mean, look, Gerry's right in some ways. Like we help clients, and we really help our clients. And I would say it starts with understanding like, what's the issue? What are they solving for? And in many ways, putting ourselves at the heart of their business, and the heart of kind of where they are in the market, the growth they're going after, the efficiency plays they're running, the transformation needs that they have, and how do we best help them to bring, could be solutions, the expertise, the experiences to help them to differentiate and, drive growth, stakeholder value in the end. But I would say we can help all clients, all industries, and just, what I think we love doing is really helping a client with those most challenging, complex problems.
All of this consulting that has to revolve around AI, you will have a lot of work to do in the next few years.
It's exciting times, Gerry, that's for sure.
Awesome. Well, Christina, thank you again for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Joe, it's great to be here with you and Gerry. Tons of fun.
Thank you.
This has been The Great Digital Transformation with Gerard Zatvani. To participate in the conversation, go to gerardzatvani.com. The Great Digital Transformation is a production of Forbes Books.